Welcome to the Misti Blue Podcast. I'm Misty Green, and you're listening to the Beauty for Ashes, Purpose in the Pain series. In this series, we've already walked with Leah through the ash of rejection, with Joseph through the ash of betrayal, with Ruth through the ash of grief, and with David through the ash of failure and shame. We're now turning to Esther and the ash of fear. If you've missed any part of this journey, I encourage you to go back and listen to the full series. Each story reveals another layer of how God brings beauty out of ashes and purpose out of our pain. This episode is about courage, about what happens when you don't feel prepared, when the weight of responsibility feels literally crushing, when your position costs you far more than you ever thought you'd have to pay. We're going to anchor our time in the story of Esther, a girl who was orphaned, who lost her parents, who was taken into a foreign palace just based on her looks and carried the hidden weight of her true identity. She faced risk, loss, and she stood often in fear, yet God positioned her as a queen to save a people, her people. Esther's story shows us that sometimes the ashes of loss become the stage for your greatest assignment. What do you do when life asks far more of you than you think you can give? When you're placed in a position you didn't ask for, you don't feel prepared for, and you're carrying a weight you never thought would be yours. When your bandwidth is being stretched and others are depending on you. That is the ash of responsibility, and it also carries with it fear and risk. Esther knew that pain, and yet through her, God proved that ashes can become our assignment, and that courage can rise smack dab in the middle, in the face of fear. That is beauty. Esther's story isn't just about a queen in a palace or a pretty face. It's about a young woman who faced loss. She was displaced. She often felt fearful and unqualified, yet she discovered that God had positioned her for such a time as this, and her journey offers us truths that we can carry into our own lives. That loss and displacement can, in fact, position you for purpose. That courage often rises not in the absence of fear, but right in the middle of it. And that your influence is not for applause, it's for assignment. Esther's story begins in grief. She lost her mother and father. She was raised by her cousin Mordecai. She grew up without parents in a world that often measured worth by lineage. Oftentimes in our current society, it's measured by network or connection. That is ash, the ash of loss, the ash of being displaced, the ash of being disconnected, the ash of not having the family you longed for. Later, Esther was taken into the Persian king's palace during a search for a new queen. She didn't choose this. She didn't volunteer. She was swept into a system that valued appearance over personhood. Her physical attributes put her in position, not her internal gifts. That is ash, the ash of displacement, the ash of being treated as an object rather than as a child of God. Maybe you weren't literally orphaned, but you've known what it's like to feel abandoned or disconnected, displaced. Maybe you are really displaced. You've moved to a new role or into a new city or a new season that you didn't choose, one you've been forced to due to circumstance or situation. Maybe you've been defined by outward measures, your skills, your physique, your beauty, maybe even your education or the titles you've borne in the past instead of your inward worth, your God-given gifts. See, even as queen, Esther carried the secret of her Jewish identity. She was hiding something, and Mordecai urged her not to reveal who her people were. See, she lived in that tension, wearing a crown but hiding her truth. That is ash, the ash of secrecy, the ash of feeling as though you would not be accepted if your true identity were to be exposed. The ash of carrying the weight of who you are, unsure if you'll be accepted. And when Haman plotted to destroy the Jews, to destroy Esther's people, the ash deepened. Esther had to choose, am I going to run with the bulls? Am I going to remain silent and safe, or am I going to risk my own life to intervene? Maybe you've hidden your faith, your pain, or your truth for fear of potential rejection. Maybe you've carried the weight of work in family or in church, but felt silenced. Maybe you faced pressure to conform simply in order to be accepted, to survive. You're having to play politics. Mordecai's words cut to the heart of Esther. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this, a position she didn't ask for, a position that though they'd attempted to prepare her for internally, she was still in tension with herself. Esther stepped into courage. She had no choice. She fasted, she prayed, she prepared herself before she walked into the throne room. She was uninvited, but she walked into the throne room of the king, risking her own life. She was not summoned. She requested that he see her. Again, for such a time as this. That is beauty, the beauty of courage in the face of fear. The opportunity to run with the bulls and choosing to do so. The beauty of purpose in the place of risk. Her boldness exposed Haman's plot, and it saved her people. And it literally rewrote history. That is beauty, the beauty of redemption and deliverance and leaving a legacy. The beauty of impacting others. Though you're fearful, you're using your big voice or your small voice, not to make noise, but to plea, to advocate, to stand in the face of adversity for others. 3 truths from Esther's story. Loss and displacement can position you for purpose. Esther was orphaned. She was taken from her home. She lost her parents. That's her ash. But from that, she was positioned as a queen, and she was used to save an entire people, her people. That is beauty. And that courage rises right in the middle of fear. That is when you'll really find out who you are. Esther risked her own life before the king. That is her ash. But her courage turned the tide of history, and that is her beauty. And that influence is for assignment, not applause. See, a crown without peace, a title without security, hidden identity, that was her ash. But through that, her position became a platform for deliverance for an entire people, a legacy. That is the beauty. Maybe you're sitting in Esther's ashes, loss, displacement, fear, disconnectedness, feeling hidden, a loss of identity. Isaiah 61:3 promises he will give them beauty for ashes and the oil of joy for mourning and the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Esther's ashes were real. She was orphaned. She was taken. She risked her own life, but God's beauty was greater. Redemption, deliverance, purpose for such a time as this. Esther's life preaches this: your ashes can be the very place God reveals your assignment. Loss does not disqualify you, and fear does not cancel your courage. Hidden seasons don't hide you from God's plan. You are being prepared. You are being positioned, not by accident, but by providence. If this episode encouraged you, share it with someone walking through loss or fear. Remind them ashes are not the end. With God, they are the soil of beauty.